Welcome, traveler. The night is cold, and the winds howl like lost souls through the trees. But here, by the fire, you'll find warmth and stories to pass the long winter hours. Pull up a chair, won't you? Rest your weary bones, and let the flicker of the flames soothe your fears. Though I warn you, not all chills come from the snow outside. Tonight, I have 3 tales to share. Tales born of winter's darkest heart, where desperation leads to choices, and choices lead to doom. You may find these stories unsettling, but then the truth often is. So, sit closer to the fire. Let its glow keep the shadows at bay, for now. And as the night deepens, allow me, your humble host, to guide you into the icy embrace of terror. Ah, music, that sublime language of angels and demons alike. I've often found it amusing how mortals pour their very souls into its creation, as if melody might redeem them. But for one, Adrian Bell, it was not redemption he sought. No, he sought immortality through his art, and naturally, I was more than willing to oblige. Adrian was a man consumed. Once the darling of symphonic halls, his career had faltered under the weight of his own ego and mediocrity. The world moved on. His name became a whisper, then an afterthought. By the time he found me, he was a shadow of himself, lingering in an empty rehearsal space, fingers trembling over sheet music that refused to sing. I emerged from the gloom as a simple patron, dressed in somber elegance. "Mr. Bell," I said, my voice low and rich, "I've long admired your work." He looked up, startled, his face gaunt and desperate. "You've heard my music?" he asked, hope flickering like a dying ember. "Indeed. It's not your talent that's lacking, Adrian," I replied, leaning closer. "It's inspiration. You've glimpsed greatness, but you've never truly held it. I can change that." The deal was struck quickly, as they so often are. He signed his name in trembling hand, the ink as red as his burning desire. And from that moment, Adrian's music changed. His compositions became masterpieces of haunting beauty, filled with melodies that pierced the soul and harmonies that echoed like the whispers of ghosts. Success returned with a vengeance. Concert halls overflowed, critics wept openly at his performances, and audiences left transformed. But with each crescendo of his fame, the curse I'd planted grew stronger. It began subtly. Musicians in his orchestra complained of unease while playing his pieces. Violinists' hands cramped as if gripped by unseen forces. Woodwinds emitted notes that sounded more like screams. Yet Adrian dismissed their concerns, consumed by the rapture of his success. Then came the night of the grand premiere. The Symphony of the Eternal, a piece Adrian claimed had come to him in a fevered dream, was performed in a gilded hall, packed with the elite. As the first notes filled the air, an unnatural chill settled over the audience. The music was otherworldly, mesmerizing yet profoundly unsettling. Listeners clutched their seats, their breaths shallow, their eyes wide with dread. And then the violence began. A man in the balcony let out a blood-curdling scream and threw himself to the floor below. A woman clawed at her own face, as though trying to tear out an unseen terror. The orchestra continued to play, their faces locked in expressions of horror, their bodies moving as if possessed. Adrian stood at the podium, conducting with a manic fervor, oblivious to the chaos around him. The audience turned on one another, their fear twisting into madness. Blood splattered the pristine walls, and the once beautiful hall echoed with the cacophony of violence. When the last dreadful note faded, the hall was silent, save for the drip of blood and the gasps of the dying. Adrian turned to me, his face alight with triumph. "Did you hear it?" he whispered. "They finally understand." I stepped forward, my shadow stretching impossibly long across the carnage. "Oh, Adrian, they understand, yes. But it's not adoration they feel. It's terror." His smile faltered. "I don't—" "You wanted to touch eternity," I said, my voice echoing like a funeral bell. "And now you have. Your music will haunt this earth forever, played in the halls of despair and the chambers of the damned." He fell to his knees, finally comprehending the true cost of his ambition. As the fires began to rise around him, consuming the hall and its tragic occupants, I stepped back into the shadows, my work complete. Adrian Bell had wanted to leave a legacy, and I had ensured he would. But as with all my gifts, it came at a price. A melody composed in madness, played for eternity in hell. Ambition, a flame that burns brightest in those who dare to dream beyond their means. For mortals, ambition is often a beacon. For me, it's a lure. Such was the case with Lila Hart, a struggling architect desperate to make her mark on the world. Little did she know, her masterpiece would be her undoing. When I first crossed her path, she was drowning in frustration. Rejected proposals, dwindling clients, and mounting debts had left her hollow. She sat alone in a cafe, sketching feverishly, her pen carving impossible structures onto napkins and scraps of paper. The fire in her eyes had dimmed, but I could still fan its embers. I entered as a man of taste and refinement, dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of wealth and influence. I admired her sketches, my voice dripping with quiet admiration. "You have vision," I told her, "the kind of vision the world needs." She laughed bitterly. "The world doesn't seem to agree." "Oh, but it will," I said, leaning closer. "With my help, your designs will defy gravity, redefine beauty, and stand as eternal testaments to your genius." The offer was irresistible. In the haze of her despair, she signed her name to my parchment, sealing her fate. From that moment, her life transformed. Wealthy investors flocked to her side. Construction crews broke ground, and her crowning achievement, a gleaming skyscraper unlike any other, began to rise. The Heart Spire, as it came to be called, was a wonder of the modern world. Its sleek, twisting design seemed to defy nature itself, stretching toward the heavens like a monument to human ambition. Crowds gathered daily to marvel at its construction, while Lila basked in her newfound fame. But as the tower neared completion, whispers of unease began to surface. Workers spoke of strange accidents, tools falling from secured heights, scaffolding giving way without warning. More troubling were the sounds, eerie moans that echoed through the unfinished halls, and whispers in languages no one could identify. Lila dismissed these tales as nonsense, attributing them to overwork and nerves. She was too close to her dream to let superstition derail her. But the whispers grew louder, and the accidents more frequent. By the time the tower stood complete, the undercurrent of dread was impossible to ignore. The grand unveiling of the Heart Spire was a night of triumph. Lila stood at the base of her creation, surrounded by glittering lights, cameras, and admirers. Speeches were made, glasses raised, and the crowd marveled at her genius. But as midnight approached, the celebratory air grew heavy. The first scream came from a photographer on the observation deck. Then another as a guest on the 50th floor collapsed, clutching his throat. Chaos erupted as the tower seemed to come alive. Walls twisted, doors slammed shut, and shadows moved with malevolent purpose. People fled, but the exits were gone, swallowed by the shifting architecture. I found Lila in her penthouse office, trembling as she stared at the skyline. "What is happening?" she whispered. "Your masterpiece," I replied, stepping from the shadows. "It is everything you dreamed it would be, and more." "No," she whimpered. "This can't be real." "Oh, it's quite real," I said, my voice carrying the weight of inevitability. "You didn't just design a building, Lila. You built a doorway, and now it has opened." The windows shattered, revealing a swirling abyss where the city once stood. Lila screamed as unseen forces pulled her toward the chasm. I watched with satisfaction as she fell, her cries swallowed by the void. Her tower remains, standing as a dark silhouette against the skyline. No one dares enter, for it is no longer a monument to human achievement. It is a gateway to despair, a beacon for those who dream too high and fall too far. The pleasures of the flesh, how mortals revel in their senses, none more so than the palate. The taste of indulgence, the savor of excess, and the hunger for greatness have always been my allies. And so, when Victor Carmine, a man of fire and ambition, entered my domain, I knew he would make the perfect ingredient for my next recipe of ruin. Victor was a chef, once celebrated for his culinary artistry, but now fading into obscurity. A new wave of food trends and younger talents had left him stranded in the past, his once bustling restaurant reduced to a ghostly quiet. I found him there one night, slumped over a bottle of wine, the air thick with the scent of burnt dreams and old regrets. "Victor Carmine," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Your talent is undeniable, yet here you sit, wasted and forgotten." He looked up, his eyes bloodshot but defiant. "Who the hell are you?" "A connoisseur," I replied, sliding into a chair across from him. "Of talent, of ambition, of possibility." He sneered, but I could see the spark of curiosity. "And what do you want?" "Oh, it's not what I want, Victor. It's what you want. Fame, fortune, to be remembered as the greatest chef who ever lived. I can give you that. I merely require a small, insignificant return on my investment." I smiled slightly as I slid the contract over to his side of the table. The deal was made over the remnants of a cold, half-eaten meal. My contracts are rarely written, you see. Words, when chosen carefully, can bind as tightly as chains. Victor's rise was meteoric. Critics raved, diners wept with joy, and his creations became the stuff of legend. But, as with all my gifts, there was a cost. The first dish was an appetizer, a truffle soufflé so delicate it seemed to melt on the tongue. But as the diners enjoyed their meals, an airy pall fell over the dining room. One guest clutched his chest, gasping for air before collapsing. Another began to tremble uncontrollably, blood trickling from her nose. Victor dismissed these incidents as coincidence, until they began happening nightly. Each new dish he created brought more praise and more death. His food, exquisite as it was, consumed not just hunger, but the very life force of those who ate it. The diners left satisfied but drained, their vitality stolen bite by bite. Victor began to notice the signs of his curse, the pale faces of his patrons, the way their joy turned to unease. But by then, it was too late. His restaurant was packed every night, and his fame had grown too large to escape. One night, Victor prepared what he called his magnum opus, a tasting menu so intricate and perfect, it would cement his place in history. He worked through the night, tasting and adjusting, his hands trembling with exhaustion and fear. When the first course was served, the air in the dining room seemed to grow colder. As the final dish was placed before his guests, I made my entrance. Victor froze, his knife clattering to the floor. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "What do you want?" I smiled, savoring the aroma of his terror. "I always collect what I'm owed, Victor. Tonight, your masterpiece will be your last." The guests, now pale and silent, rose from their seats, their eyes dark and hollow, their faces twisted grotesquely, as if their very humanity had been devoured. Victor backed away, but the air seemed to thicken, trapping him in place. One by one, they descended upon him with an eerie, mechanical precision. Hands, once dainty and refined, now clawed like talons, tearing at his chef's coat and flesh beneath. His screams echoed through the dining room as they dragged him to the center of the room, the pristine floor slick with his blood. "Stop!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with pain and desperation. "Please, stop." But they would not. Teeth gnashed, ripping flesh from his bones, their mouths stretching unnaturally wide, as if consuming not just his body, but his soul. His blood sizzled on their tongues, releasing a dark vapor that coiled through the air like smoke from a cursed flame. Victor's cries grew weaker, his limbs twitching as they feasted on him, piece by agonizing piece. By the time his heart gave its final shuddering beat, only his hollow eyes remained, staring in frozen horror at the ceiling. I stepped forward, looking down at the pitiful remains. "Bon appétit," I said softly, a wry smile playing on my lips. Victor Carmine was a chef who dreamed of immortality, and I gave it to him. His name is still whispered in the culinary world, his recipes preserved in infamy, but his true legacy lies far below, where he serves eternally at my table, feeding the insatiable appetites of the damned.